Alright, now that we understood the logic of our app, we are now ready to start building the different files and tables we're going to need for our project. So first of all, we're going to need to create a database where we're going to create our tables. So to do this, you're going to need to go to your cPanel and then go to Databases, MySQL Databases. Now to create a database, you can just choose a name for the database and then click on Create Database. Let's go back. Now we're going to need to create a user and add it to our database. Okay, so let's create a new user. So let's choose a name for our user and generate a password using the password generator. So make sure you store this password somewhere because you're going to need it later to connect to the database. And let's use this password. And let's click on Create User. Alright, so now our user is created. Okay. Now let's add this user to our database. So if you scroll down, you'll find Add User to Database. So that's our user and that's our database. And let's click on Add. And let's give our user all privileges. Okay, and click on Make Changes. Okay, let's go back. Alright, so now we've got a database and we've got a user, and our user can connect to the database as we have just added them to the database. Alright. Alright, now let's create the different tables we're going to need for our login and sign up processes. So let's go back to our cPanel. Okay, and let's go to phpMyAdmin. Okay. So that's our database. So let's click on it. Okay, so we don't see anything at the moment because we haven't created any tables yet. So to create a table, let's give it a name. So let's start with our users table. So that's where we're going to store the users' details like their username, email, and password. And for now, we're going to go for 5 columns. Okay. Okay, so the first field is going to be the user ID. Okay, so that's going to be an integer, and that's going to identify our user. So we're going to need to use the auto increment option for this field. Okay. So if you remember, this option will allow a new user to take the next user ID in an incremental way, which means the previous user ID plus 1. Okay, so the next field is going to be the username. Okay, and we're going to go for a varchar, okay, with a maximum number of characters of 30. Next, we're going to need the email. We're going to go for a varchar as well. And the maximum here is going to be 50. And then we're going to need the password. You can give it a varchar as well with a maximum of 30 characters. And finally, we're going to need the activation field, which we'll use to activate the account of our user when they sign up. And we're going to go for a varchar, or in this case, actually we can go for a char, and we're going to go for a maximum of 32, and I'm going to explain later why we chose this. All right, now let's click on save. Okay, so we've got our users table now. Just one comment, for now we are building these tables manually for clarity reasons, but I recommend you write some PHP code for creating these tables so that if you want to transfer your project to another server, you find it easy by just running the queries. Okay? All right, now we're going to move to the next table. That's going to be the Remember Me table, which we will use to remember users who checked the Remember Me checkbox when they logged in. So let's click on New, and let's give it a name. That's going to be Remember Me. So the first field is going to be the ID of the record. Okay, it's going to be an integer, and we're going to need to make it auto increment. The next one is going to be the first authenticator. Okay. And the second one, the next one is going to be F2 of authenticator 2. Okay. We covered all this in the logic of the app. So the type of the first one, we're going to go for a fixed number of characters. So we're going to go for char, and the number we're going to go for is 12. I'm going to explain this later. Okay, so the second one is going to be char as well, and I'm going to go for 64. Okay, we'll go back to this later. All right, next one is going to be the user ID. Okay, that's an integer, and we're going to need to add another column, and that's going to be the expiry date or time. Okay, so the type of this one is going to be date and time. All right, let's click on save. Okay, so of course our second table. Now let's move to the next one. So that's going to be the forgot password table. Okay, so the first field is going to be the ID of the record, and we're going to give it the auto increment option. Okay, the next one is the user ID, and the next one is going to be the validation key. Okay, or the security key that we'll create in our PHP code. So we're going to go for a char. Okay, as the key is going to have a fixed number of characters, so you're going to be using the same amount of memory, and we're going to go for a length of 32. Okay, we'll cover this when we write the PHP code. Okay, and then we're going to have a time column. So just to be able to master both the date and time type and using the time as an integer, I'm going to go for an integer for the time in here. Okay, unlike the previous table where we set the time or the expiry column to date and time. And we're going to need another column, which is going to be the status. Okay, and let's go for a varchar, okay, of 7 characters. So if you remember from the logic, status is going to be either pending or used. Okay, that's why the maximum here is 7 characters. So let's click on save. All right, so now we have created all the tables we're going to need for our sign up and login processes. Okay. Now we're going to build the different files and understand their code structure. All right, now you would need to go to your Fi FTP and build the different files you're going to need for the sign up and login processes. So for now, we've got our index.php file, which includes the different forms, like the login form. The user is going to fill those forms, and in order to process those forms, we're going to need to make AJAX calls to other PHP files. So those AJAX calls are going to be placed inside a file, which we'll call index.js. So this is a JavaScript file where we will place all these AJAX calls, and it will call or point to other PHP files. So the first file we're going to need to point to is a file called signup.php. So this file is going to take care of the sign up process once the user clicks on the submit button after filling the sign up form. Okay. The next one is going to be activate.php. Okay. So that's the file where we're gonna direct our user once they click on the activation link that they will receive by email after signing up. Okay. Then we're gonna have a login.php file, which will process the login data. Okay. Another file we're gonna need is the rememberme.php file, which will process the data if the user logs in while checking the remember me box. Okay. Now we're going to need another file to process the inputs of the forgot password form, and that's going to be forgot password.php. Okay. Now, once the user submits the forgot password form, they will receive an email, okay, with a link. So that link is going to direct them to another file, which we'll call resetpassword.php. So this file is going to show a new form for our user to reset their password. Okay. So to process that form inside this file, we're going to need another file, which we'll call store reset password. Okay. So this file is going to update the password for our user. Okay. All right, now let's open all these files in brackets and go through their code structure.